Of course, the youth of the US wants political change, but not just change, improvement. We are the ones currently graduating college with huge debt or not going at all because the cost is too high. We are trying to break into career fields that are not hiring. We are faced with the skyrocketing costs of housing, and we're trying to support our young children. My name is Katie Petrovsky, and I'm an active member in my Green Party here in Massachusetts. I'm here tonight to help launch the Young Greens Rising initiative that is going to change America. Our parents' generation and the publications they flip through are often quick to brand us millennials as entitled and demanding, as we should be, because we are entitled to a future free from inescapable student loan debt, unemployment, economic collapse, endless war, and climate chaos. In our lifetime, we have seen both the Republicans and the Democrats completely fail in their responsibility to clean up the mess they made. That's why I'm so excited to introduce the one candidate into the 2016 presidential race who truly stands for the change that young people need to see. She is Dr. Jill Stein, running for candidate of the Green Party. If every young voter were to go to the polls and cast a vote for Jill Stein, we'd see a political revolution in this nation that would put our voices front and center. I want every young person in America to understand that their political party is not red and it's not blue either, it's green.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you very much.
So thank you all so much for being here. Welcome to the kickoff for Young Greens Rising, the national student organization for our campaign. And thank you for leading the charge for an America and a world that works for all of us. This is an historic moment as people are rising up like we haven't seen for generations. You, the younger generation, as always, are leading the charge and are at the forefront of this struggle for social change, as you have always been. And now you are leading the charge in the campaign to end student debt, to make college free, the fight for living wages, and to make Black Lives Matter, to stop immigrant deportations, and in the struggle for climate justice, for LGBT rights and women's rights and Indigenous sovereignty, and so much more. So it's time for an uprising from the campus to the streets to the voting booth, because we are facing a crisis of historic proportions. No one has more at stake than you do, but no one has more courage and vision to lead us forward. So a few words about this crisis. The economy, we're told, is in a recovery, but for most people, it is in an emergency. 1 out of 2 American families are in poverty or near poverty, according to the Census Bureau. 20 million people need full-time jobs, yet the vast majority of jobs being created are part-time, temporary, and low wage. Wages, in fact, have been declining since this so-called recovery, most of all for the lowest paid workers, while the gains are going almost entirely to the top 1%. CEO compensation has surged, and a mere 80 billionaires now has acquired the wealth of a full half of the entire world's population, 3.5 billion people. The economic crisis is then compounded by systemic racism, with the average African-American family having only 5 cents of wealth on the dollar for the average white family. And 1 out of every 3 African-American men are held hostage by the prison system thanks to the racist war on drugs. And people of color are being killed by police and vigilantes as much as every 28 hours by some accountings. Add to that the ecological crisis, which is beyond an emergency. 2014 was the hottest year yet, and we're now on track to beat those records. Floods, droughts, fires, and storms are off the charts. And the foremost climate scientist, James Hansen, has recently said that sea level is highly likely to rise by 10 feet and more as soon as 50 years from now. That means game over for coastal cities and arguably for civilization as we know it. Species are disappearing at a rate that's 1,000 times above background as we plunge headlong into the sixth great extinction in the history of the planet. And the survival of our own species is very much at risk by the end of this century, when we are going to lose about half of existing species. All of this is on the current course that's been charted by Republicans and Democrats who are basically on the payroll of the fossil fuel companies and the usual suspects. So all of this is the plan according to the current political establishment, which is why we so badly need to change that political establishment. Our lives depend on this. All of these issues converge on the younger generation. 40 million students are in debt with few prospects to repay that debt because the jobs aren't there. And youth who don't go to college are facing astronomical unemployment rates, with 33% unemployment among white youth, 51% among African American youth. Absolutely staggering. While the climate crisis also falls squarely on your shoulders, because who is it that's going to be around in 50 years when we start having this absolutely catastrophic level of flooding with rising sea levels? What this adds up to is a whole new dimension of justice. We call it generational justice. This is what we must achieve and what you deserve, and we will settle for nothing less. So it's time for a new way forward. There is a political vacuum that's waiting to be filled, and we are going to fill it. 50% of Americans do not identify as either Democrat or Republican, and about 60% in polls are calling for a major new political party because the establishment parties have done such a poor job of meeting our essential needs and throwing us under the bus, basically. Together, we can lift up the transformative solutions that the American people are calling for, solutions that you deserve and that we have the power to create. And you heard that right. I did say we have the power. The political establishment says that we are powerless, but forget what they say. 40 million students in debt, if they decide to come out and vote in November of 2016, guess what? They can turn the political establishment on its head, because 40 million voters who come out to vote to cancel their debt by voting Green, which is the only political party that opposes student debt and that will cancel that debt if elected. We are the only choice to cancel student debt. So if millennials come out, they can assert their power, and that 40 million votes is actually enough to decide the election and to cancel student debt in a 3 or 4-way race. 40 million is virtually a plurality. Especially when you add in our potential allies, like 24 million Latino voters, we have the numbers that it takes. A coalition for people, planet, and peace will be unstoppable the minute we stand up with the courage of our convictions and organize to assert our power. So we have the power to end student debt. If we bailed out the bankers who crashed the economy through their waste, fraud, and abuse, if we gave them $16 trillion, isn't it time that we bail out the students who are victims of this stalled and crashed economy? And we can make public higher education free. In the 20th century, free high school education was provided because it was essential to get the younger generation off to a secure economic start. Well, in the 21st century, it's a college education that is essential to have a secure economic future. And we know that free higher education pays for itself. We know that from the GI Bill, because every tax dollar invested in the higher education of the returning GIs following the Second World War, that $1 was magnified 700%. $1 returned $7 in increased tax revenues and public benefits. So this is a win-win. All of this is part of our Power to the People plan, which is basically a blueprint calling for the world that we deserve and that we have the power to create. We do have the power to create 20 million living wage jobs in an emergency Green New Deal that will green our economy, turn the tide on climate change, and make wars for oil obsolete. It will transition us to 100% wind, water, and sun by 2030 in enough time to avert the growing climate catastrophe. And it will create sustainable organic agriculture, public transportation with safe sidewalks and bike paths, and restore our essential ecosystems. The energy transition basically pays for itself in health savings alone from the benefits of averting the innumerable illnesses that are downstream from the pollution of fossil fuels. So this is a win-win-win. We have the power to provide health care as a human right through Medicare for all, delivering comprehensive quality care for everyone while saving trillions of dollars, streamlining the massive, wasteful private health insurance bureaucracy. We have the power to provide quality, free public education as a human right and to end the runaway school privatizations, high-stakes testing, closings, and the school-to-prison pipeline. We have the power to provide a welcoming path to citizenship for our immigrant residents who've contributed so much to our economy and society. And we can end the predatory trade deals, illegal military interventions, and coups that by the US government that has created this surge of refugees to start with. We have the power to create a national action plan for racial justice now, to end police violence and militarization and systemic racism in all sectors of society. We have the power to tax Wall Street, to stop bailing them out, and to turn too big to fail banks into the public banks that we so badly need. And we have the power to create a foreign policy based on diplomacy, international law, and human rights, no longer on global military and economic domination that is blowing back at us as such a miserable and growing failure. This is the world that we can create. Don't believe them for a minute when they tell you that we are powerless. We are powerful. We have the numbers, we have the vision, we have the blueprint, and we have the community values that are shared across this nation. Together, we can build this power. Visit jill2016.com and start a Young Greens Rising chapter in your campus, in your school, and in your community. Because solutions are in our hands, justice is in our hands, democracy is in our hands. Together, we can create a world that works for all of us and ensure that people, planet, and peace prevail. It's in our hands. Thank you so very much. Now, before we move to our open discussion here, and save up your questions. In fact, you can start to send them in right now through the live stream text. You can send in your questions. Right now, we are going to give a brief talk that our director for Young Greens Rising, who's in Madison, was going to give, but we've had a technical problem. So instead, Katie is going to read David's words. So you can think of this as coming from David Schwab, who I hope you will have the opportunity to talk with or do a workshop with. in his capacity, empowering you to be the force of Young Greens Rising. So I will bring on Katie now to deliver Dave's words for us. Take it away, Katie. Thank you.
Will do. Excellent. And as I'm reading this, I'm sure everybody is going to be sending in their questions. Can't wait to read those. This is the message from Dave. Hi, my name is Dave Schwab, and I'm Jill Stein's Assistant Campaign Manager for Outreach. I'm really excited to be working on Young Greens Rising. When I was in college, I started a Green Party group without knowing anything about organizing. There were a lot of times when I wished there was someone I could reach out to for help, guidance, or just for ideas. That's why I'm so excited to be together with you all, launching a national organization to bring students together around the issues that matter to us, and a candidate who truly cares about creating a just, peaceful, green future for our generation and future generations to come. Let me start with a quick story. In 2012, Jill Stein went to the largest student-run mock election in the U.S. at Western Illinois University. Going in, most students didn't know about Jill and probably planned to vote for Obama or Romney. But after Jill spoke for just 10 minutes or so, she got 27% of the vote. This shows how powerful Jill's message resonates with young people. Now, even more so than in 2012, things are changing fast, and our generation is rapidly losing trust in the Democratic and Republican parties. 58% of Americans believe Democrats and Republicans are failing us, and we need a new major party. 50% of millennials don't identify themselves with either establishment party. What this means is that now is the best time we've ever seen to build a party for the people from the grassroots up. We need a party completely independent of the corporate establishment that has brought us climate crisis, as well as record high inequality, record high tuition, and record high debt. Like I said, Jill's message is so powerful that our number one job as organizers is simply to get Jill's message out to the people. Millions of students don't know yet that they have a choice besides politics as usual. But we can change that. That's what Young Greens Rising is all about. Young Green Rising is a national student organization created by the Jill Stein for President team to help you organize a group on your campus to organize students to support Jill Stein. We've drawn on the experiences of young organizers so that even if you've never organized a group before, we can offer you guidance and support to get your chapter up and running. Having a national network of campus chapters will allow us to coordinate for action on important issues. For example, demanding tuition-free higher education and abolition of student debt. It allows our chapters to work together and learn from each other. We offer campus chapters a menu of activities that you can do, such as hosting debates, writing articles for student papers, polling students, and we offer support for these activities. But we also encourage chapters to get creative and innovative about spreading Jill's message. We want to learn from students organizing on the ground what works for you, so we can replicate your success strategies across the country. When you sign up as a campus organizer, we'll send you the Young Greens Rising Campus Organizing 101 guide to help you get started. And we'll continue to work with you as soon as you get your chapter established and start spreading the message and recruiting students. We want to hear what your needs are, because Young Greens Rising is about empowering young people to become leaders of the movement we need for humans to have a future on this planet. So please go to jill2016.com/volunteer and make sure to sign up for campus organizing so we can all stay in touch. Again, thank you so much for being here. I'm tremendously excited to work with you all because now is the time for this movement, and we are the ones we've been waiting for. It's truly in our hands. Now back to the always amazing Jill Stein. All right, your turn again. Oh, we have our first question from you guys. Thanks again for sending these in. Keep sending them in. Our first question is from Brendan. What do you think, Jill Stein, about the Iran nuclear deal?
Great. Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Dave, in absentia. And thank you, Brendan, for the question, which is a very important one. The Iran nuclear deal is a very good first step. And let me just preface this by saying that the security agencies and the intelligence agencies, both of the United States and of Israel, believe it or not, actually dispute that Iran has a nuclear weapons program or intentions of building a weapon. So, the premise that we have to stop Iran from developing a bomb is not really supported by our intelligence agencies to start with. Nonetheless, it's a good thing not to have nuclear bombs. And this is, I think, is very important for quelling the hysteria in the Western countries and the propaganda put out by the Netanyahu government that attempts to demonize Iran through this. So it's a very good deal. But let me say it should go farther. There are other nuclear powers in the region. And we very much need to address the nuclear weapons also of Israel and of Pakistan and of India, for example. So this should be a first step. And I'll mention also there's another premise here that nuclear power is a good thing and that everybody has a right to nuclear power. This is one of the premises of this treaty, when in fact the Middle East especially should be going solar now and not nuclear. It's a needless threat to their water supplies, their safety, as well as political stability to have nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants. As long as there are nuclear power plants, there is a threat of the development of nuclear weapons. So the real way to eliminate nuclear weapons is to move beyond nuclear power. So I would just make those 2 points. We need to move from a policy of so-called anti-proliferation, stopping the spread, to actually disarming and getting rid of everybody's nuclear weapons. Because it's hard to tell some nations that they just didn't get in the door like we did, when, in fact, it's the principle that needs to be upheld. Nuclear weapons are extremely dangerous. Nuclear war of any size is not survivable. There's no such thing as a local nuclear war. So we need to abolish all of the nuclear weapons, and likewise, we need to move towards clean, renewable energy, not nuclear energy. Thank you. Katie, you have another one?
I absolutely do. Our second question here is from Nick, and Nick asks, what actions can we take as Young Greens on campus to answer the young Republicans and Democrats? So how can the Young Greens at least match this momentum that the young Republicans and Democrats already have?
That's a great question. And put it this way, once you start talking about student debt, there's no way that they can match your momentum, because there is no issue that hits more deeply and more broadly than the issue of student debt, as well as the issue of free public higher education. So I would say, just simply work on getting out that message about student debt, and you will win the day every time. In my experience, there's nothing that motivates and mobilizes millennials more than the issue of student debt. Most students actually are carrying debt. In the most privileged private schools, there are many students who don't have debt, but they are actually a small minority. Most students are carrying debt. And you will find that you win the day the minute you begin to talk about it, because there is no other candidate and no other political party that supports the abolition of student debt. And we can provide for you some of the arguments that you want to talk about, namely that quantitative easing, that complicated economic term, which basically means striking out the debt as a digital reality. This is what we did for bankers. We can do this for student debt as well, because that debt is almost entirely owned by the federal government. So there's all kinds of in the weeds information about this that we'll be glad to give you, so that you can make the argument that we actually do have the ability to abolish that debt. And when we do that, it's really good for the economy. Unlike this debt forgiveness that we did for the banks, that basically just enabled them to do more gambling and more reckless waste, fraud, and abuse. But forgiving student debt unleashes incredible creativity and the ingenuity of a generation. It's really the job of your generation to reimagine society. That's what we have always relied on the younger generation to do. But while you are in debt, you have to work whatever job you can get, and it really keeps you inside of a box. But society needs you to be outside of a box and doing the most creative and remarkable things that only you can do as the next generation with a fresh vision of where we're going. So ending student debt enables you to do that. There are many other arguments you can make about healthcare as a human right, not having to worry about where your healthcare is going to come from, and about the right to a job. Likewise, on climate change, we are the only campaign that has a plan to be at 100% clean renewable energy by 2030 in time to solve the climate crisis. And there too, we have a number of talking points we can share with you that really make the case. The obstruction here is entirely political. When people say we can't do it, that climate change is inevitable, they're talking about assuming that we are locked into a political system that won't allow it. But that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the minute we break through that political system, guess what? We can actually defeat climate change. And I'll just mention one other thing about this. In the Second World War, when Pearl Harbor was bombed, it took us 6 months to move to a wartime economy. 6 months to change fundamentally how the economy functioned. Well, we have an emergency now that's as big as the Second World War. In many ways, it's even bigger because there's no coming back from it. So if we could do it in the Second World War to move to a wartime economy, we can do it now. And we don't have to do it in 6 months, 10 or 15 years, we'll be fine. But we need to get started, and we need a political revolution that truly changes the political system, not just the candidate, but the system, in order to win our future back. Thank you.
Excellent. Our next question has to do with all of these goals that you have and you really want to accomplish. So how do you realistically propose to do any of these things without the backing of Congress, seeing as there are currently no Green members in our Congress?
Great. So first, let me say that right now we have a Congress that doesn't accomplish anything either, and when President Obama was first elected, and he actually had majorities, Democratic majorities, in the House and the Senate, what they accomplished in that state of emergency with massive foreclosures and the economic meltdown, what they accomplished was great if you were Wall Street. So accomplishing things in the current political environment is not so great for everyday people. It may be great for the funders of big campaigns. And the fossil fuel companies, et cetera. So just, watch what you wish for, because a Congress that accomplishes stuff isn't always good. You want to be sure that there's a good set of values and there's leadership at the helm. And about the question of how would we work in a green administration, the point is we cannot get elected unless there's a massive mobilization. If there's a massive mobilization, we will also be electing people to Congress and to Senate. And in addition to that, we will have a ground force like none you've seen before. Barack Obama created an amazing ground force, but when he won, that force was put on the shelf because it wasn't really about his agenda, which had more to do with Wall Street and corporations. So our force will not be put on the shelf. And that force has enormous power to force votes. Because when legislators understand that their survival depends on their vote, then you know what, you can get them to do the right thing. But it depends on the kind of mobilization, a political and electoral mobilization that we haven't seen for quite some time, because we don't have an honest or popular political system. You know, the word Congress is, what is it? It's less popular than the word cockroach. And so, you know, it's really important that we give people something to engage for. And I'll just make one last point about this. When I was first tricked into running for office back in the year 2002, when I ran for governor against Mitt Romney and a few other people, we were able to fight our way into a debate. And in that debate, I articulated basically this agenda that was said to be so fringe, you know. Well, it turned out when I walked out of the debate studio into the waiting press area, I got mobbed by the press for the first time and the last time, who said, you won the debate on the instant online viewer poll. Well, that was the last time they did an instant online viewer poll. And at that point, it like woke me up that this is a big game. You know, this is a big game we play. It's a scam that tells us that we are the fringe. Actually, this is where the American people are. And that's what I meant in my remarks about our really representing community values and an agenda that is broadly supported by the American people. So I'd say, let's just get into office. And from there, the rest is going to be easy. It doesn't end in getting into office. You know, it just begins. But it will be far harder to get into office than it will be to use the bully pulpit of the office in order to keep engaging that groundswell to move us forward for people, planet, and peace. Thank you.
And our next wonderful question is from Joshua. In the most recent elections in the UK, we saw a surge in Green Party voter registration among young voters. How can we replicate that here in the US?
That is exactly what we want to do with Young Greens Rising. Because debt is such a compelling issue for most millennials, and it's 40 million and growing, it's probably more than 40 million now, you know, we really have the capacity to create a surge. And it's not only around student debt. You know, we are also the only campaign that calls for downsizing our military. Substantively, we're calling for a 50% reduction. We're calling for a withdrawal of our military bases. So, you know, there are a lot of young people who share our values, that security is here at home, that having armaments and occupations all around the world actually makes it a more dangerous place and creates resentment against us. We're the only campaign that is saying we need to eliminate the unconscionable drone program, which does so much to mobilize the public against us. We're the only campaign that actually calls for ending high-stakes testing. Believe it or not, we are the only campaign, and the Democratic leadership showed that in voting against a recent amendment as part of the big education bill reauthorization, where the Democratic leadership and rank and file actually all voted against an amendment to cancel high-stakes testing. So there are a number of issues on Palestinian human rights. We're the only campaign that stands up on that issue. So there are a variety of issues that young people are very concerned about the right to a job. We call for creating 20 million jobs on an emergency basis, and on the issue of climate change, that we are the only campaign that has set a deadline by which we must move to 100% clean renewables. So on those issues, which speak to the hearts and minds of so many millennials, I think we're out in front, and we can, you know, engage that groundswell, because young people know how much their future is at stake. Thank you.
Our next question is about Bernie Sanders, and you know that a lot of the youth of America are really excited about Bernie. So where do you and Bernie differ, and why should young voters vote for you and not for Bernie?
My campaign has a lot in common with Bernie Sanders, and we have, I think, more in common than we don't. The difference is that I'm running in a party that supports those values, and Bernie's running in a party that is typically been at war with those values. And where there have been similar principled rebels like Bernie inside the Democratic Party usually has a kill switch to stop that campaign. And you can look back to Jesse Jackson during the civil rights movement, who had an incredibly vigorous and active, excited campaign. You can look at Dennis Kucinich. You can look at Howard Dean. These are all campaigns that get stopped by the Democratic Party. And one of the ways that they stop them is through this Super Tuesday primaries, also called the money primary, that requires hundreds of millions of dollars, because there are lots of primaries on the same day. And they also have these so-called super delegates that are not accountable to the voters. They're more sort of insiders of the party. And then you can look at the Dean Scream, which was basically, you know, a public relations campaign against Howard Dean when his reform campaign became threatening. So the difference, I guess, is whether you have faith in the Democratic Party or not. And having been around the block too long and seen things continue to sort of, they put out little tantalizing feelers, but then they will slap you down and the party will keep marching to the right. And to my mind, that's a problem. So I know I don't have a bit of faith that the Democratic Party is going to pull this off. I don't want to quibble with Bernie supporters, and for people who want to do that, that's fine. And we will be here after the primary. For those who don't have faith that the Democratic Party is somehow going to suddenly, you know, get religion, you know, or see the light, however you want to put it, you know, we need to build an independent political base. We've seen the Democratic Party keep marching to the right throughout history. You know, real reform, this political revolution, does not happen inside the parties of the status quo. It never has and it never will. So if you're looking at the big picture, it's really important to start building this independent third party. And that's what we're doing. And that's what we're doing with Young Greens Rising. And we'll be doing really critical things, getting the word out to our community, and also making sure that we're on the ballot, that every voter has a choice. Because if you're looking at the odds, it's not likely that a reform candidate is going to survive the kill switch inside the Democratic Party. If that doesn't ring true to you, you know, well, let's find out, and we'll be here. And for those who are ready to strike out with a true system of independent politics, I'd say come on board, the sooner the better. We got no time to lose. Thanks.
Our next question is, how do you feel about whistleblower Edward Snowden and his leaking of documents on government spying, especially in terms of which countries ended up with that information?
Well, let me just say, in this country, thank goodness for Edward Snowden. You know, we have become aware of how our own government spies on us, and through all kinds of ways, through phones, through email, through how we use the web, everything imaginable. So, you know, Congress has seen fit to actually take action based on Snowden's revelations. That in and of itself is a clear testimony to the importance of what Edward Snowden released. And so, you know, in my view, we need to be treating Edward Snowden like the hero that he is. The guilty party are those who've been violating our constitutional rights. Edward Snowden has been standing up for them.
Our next question is from Charlie. Do you have any plans for taking on big pharma, all of these drug companies and how powerful they are and the issues that they tend to sometimes create?
Great. Very important issue. By moving to a single payer Medicare for all plan, we will be taking on big pharma. It's built into single payer to be doing, what's called bulk purchasing, which pharma does not like because they want to jack up the price as much as they possibly can. Through bulk purchasing, through single payer, we can bring down the price. And through having a very large government purchaser, we have enormous purchasing power to lower the price. The favors that have been done for the pharmaceutical industry by Democrats and Republicans have, contributed to the incredible escalation of healthcare costs. And it's absolutely astounding how we are looking at skyrocketing costs of pharmaceuticals, which are absolutely unconscionable. And I will add that the Trans-Pacific Partnership does many things to make corporations very powerful, including pharmaceutical companies. And one of the things that the Trans-Pacific Partnership will do is make it very hard to control the outrageous predatory profits of the pharmaceutical companies. So it's very important that we continue to work together to oppose the Trans-Pacific Partnership and to stop it in its tracks. So stay tuned to our campaign, to our Facebook page, and to our emails, because we will be mobilizing in the not too distant future to ensure that the Trans-Pacific Partnership does not pass. Thank you.
Our next question here is from Lorna, and Lorna wants to know, would you nationalize the Federal Reserve and use that to fund the Green New Deal? So would you nationalize the Federal Reserve and use that to fund the Green New Deal?
Great. Okay. So the National Federal Reserve should be nationalized. It's currently a set of private banks who make their decisions about running the economy and monetary policy based on their own private concerns, and they have enormous skin in the game here to do what benefits them. So the Fed should be transparent. It should be nationally run. In doing that, there are lots of ways that we can save a lot of money in how government borrows money. We can save an enormous amount of money in loan repayments by having a better monetary policy. But let me say, independently of the Fed, the Green New Deal basically pays for itself. There are a number of studies, and there's actually real world developments that show when you clean up dirty energy, you save so much money just because people get healthier from having less asthma, less emphysema, less heart disease, less strokes, less diabetes, less cancer, all these things that derive from the pollution that we've kind of grown accustomed to. That pollution is absolutely unnatural. So moving to green energy actually pays for itself. And then when you add in the health benefits of a sustainable agriculture and a public transportation that allows us to also bike and walk to get to transit hubs, we get so much better that we save a huge amount of money. Plus, we no longer need wars for oil, and those cuts in the military also can generate hundreds of billions of dollars. The Green New Deal essentially pays for itself, even without needing to generate new forms of revenue. I'll just mention that in addition, we need to tax Wall Street. Wall Street is the one sector of the economy that does not pay a sales tax. Everybody else does. You do. You pay a sales tax of 6, 8, even 10% on a whole slew of items. Wall Street is rolling in dough, and they don't pay a thing. If Wall Street was paying even 0.1% on its transactions, we would be generating hundreds of billions of dollars a year. So don't believe them when they say there's no money. When they say that, they mean there's not enough money for you, but there's plenty of money for them and their cronies. So we can do this differently. We can have plenty of money for jobs, for healthcare, and for saving the planet. Thank you.
Our next question here is from Jonathan, and this is getting us to think about Common Core and standardized testing and all of that. Where do you stand on education reform as far as curriculum and methods of teaching?
The current fad, which was invented by businessmen, really, not by teachers or educators or education historian or psychologists. This current fad, which was basically propagated through campaign contributions and lobbyists, this fad of privatization, this fad of test, punish, and privatize, has no basis in reality or in results. In fact, it's been found to be quite harmful to those students who are most vulnerable. And in fact, this whole myth of school accountability was intended to benefit those students who were struggling. So in fact, it hurts them more than anybody else when you close schools and basically move them to another failing school. So this policy has actually been quite a disaster if you move beyond the kind of cherry-picked results. It's not working. We need an education policy that is actually supported by educators, and we need curriculum that is developed by educators, by parents, and which is community sensitive. So we need broadly to have an education system that teaches to the whole student for lifetime learning. Teaching to a test has been a miserable failure, whether it's a test defined by the federal government or a test defined by a state government. High stakes testing is not a good way to teach or to evaluate either students or teachers whom it's also been used to abuse. So we can go back to a human-based form of education, which is what really works. We must deal with poverty. It's a complete fallacy to think that we can use high stakes testing to overcome the issues of poverty. We know from all sorts of experience that kids need to be well nourished, they need to be stable, they need not to be homeless or walking through community violence in order to be educated. We must address the broader social context of education at the same time that we rehumanize our schools. And we do have the resources to do this. We have to stop artificially concentrating those resources into the hands of the wealthy and powerful few who are in bed with the Democratic and Republican governments that both support. In fact, the leadership on this issue has been from the Democrats, has been from Barack Obama and Arne Duncan, his Secretary of Education. They have been the real force pushing forward on this privatization of our public schools. We need to go back to respecting schools, teachers, parents, and communities, and developing an education system that works. Thank you. I think, is that going to conclude? I think that wraps us up. So let me once again say thank you so much for being with us tonight. Thank you for leading the charge, and thank you for joining Young Greens Rising. We very much look forward to working with you and growing this movement going forward. We'll be in touch. Thanks so much.